Well, hello, thank you very much all for coming. My name is Daniel Finkelstein, I'm the chairman of Policy Exchange. I'm delighted to be here at the sort of British launch intellectual party for Collaborator Parish. And I know that most people in British politics would regard that as actually a question, where they're lying over the answer, deciding whether they want to collaborate or parish. But I don't think that was the author's intention. The Policy Exchange has been very fortunate to have a long and successful collaboration with Bill Bratton, who, as though many people already know, is a policing hero of both the actual physical sense and also intellectually and in terms of public administration. And for him to get together with his friend and colleague Zach Toon, an distinguished academic at Harvard with a lot of experience and interest in precisely the issue of how you collaborate, would always be of interest to Policy Exchange. But it's of great interest to us, particularly at the moment, not just at the obvious level, which is, Britain now has for the first time in his time in this last century a collaborative government to two political parties attempting to produce a government coming from very different parts of the political spectrum, but in the broader sense that all governments consist of collaboration, all big efforts in which people are engaged in are collaborative, and Policy Exchange, with its very particular ideas, is interested in how you bring people along with a very, very complicated, big and controversial program of government reform, how you encourage people to feel they're all in it together. It's very interesting when you look at the playbook that this book establishes how important a sense of common mission is, and that's something that Policy Exchange has been interested in trying to establish and interested in trying to work out what that means. So on a personal level, because of Bill Bratton's involvement and his collaboration on this book, on a policy level, because we've been interested in the questions that he's been interested in, but also on this very broad intellectual front, how we get collaboration, how we encourage people to collaborate. It couldn't be a better place or a better time to launch Collaborator Parish, and welcome its authors, Bill Bratton and Zach.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Danny, for your kind welcome, and thank you very much for your hospitality. I arrived yesterday here in London. It's a pleasure to be here. I even love the weather. To me, it's a pleasure. Bill and I wrote a book that we feel strongly is critical for today, but it also started 30 years ago. It is a story that began when Bill and I, both young professionals at the start of our careers, Bill a little farther along than I at the time, in the city of Boston. Boston was in crisis. I worked in the mayor's office. Bill was a lieutenant in the Boston Police Department. And we came together through mutual acquaintances, but then later in life, through the discovery of a collaboration at Harvard at the Kennedy School called the Executive Session for Community Policing. And it was there that a model of collaboration between researchers and practitioners was developed in the midst of what was a crisis, I think it was fair to say, in American policing. A crisis that was felt, I think, most acutely by American police executives, as well as some academics, and soon to be felt in the most extraordinary way by the Reagan White House. And it was a time, Harvard had the reputation at the time, I think it's fair to say, of sort of Beijing on the Charles. And the collaboration then between the professors and staff there with American police executives and the leadership of the Republican administration forged a set of a vision and a plan for the change in American policing that the fellow who led that, a wonderful professor named Mark Moore, promised me when he invited me to staff it, would take place within a decade. And as a result of efforts led by Mark and by Bill and others, that change was well underway within 5 years, not 10. And it showed, I think, me as a young staffer and then as a staff support for that effort, and as I then went into government myself and in research at the Kennedy School. It showed me the power of vision of practitioners marrying the real-world sense of what's possible and what's needed with academics and with political leadership, together making change happen in most extraordinary ways that gave us what we now know as community policing in the United States and around the world. Bill and I came together some years later, again in Cambridge. I was now full-time directing research programs at Harvard, and had invited him to participate in one of the sessions I was running as a senior executive in law enforcement, but around the table were leaders of American intelligence and military establishments and other organizations, all of whom touch the same set of problems of how to bring all their information together to achieve together what none could alone, namely an awareness of the world, an ability to respond, and the opportunity to collaborate to move the world in ways they all needed but couldn't by themselves. It was at a lunch break, as I took a break from moderating that session, and I thought to myself, there's something we can do here. And I went over to Bill and I said, why don't we take some of the lessons that we're learning here, and some of the lessons that Bill, as a senior executive and practitioner of great standing and achievement, had learned in the field, and talk about what we know about collaboration. It's time, it felt to me, and it was something that we knew we could do. And I said, what do you think? And Bill said, it sounds good, tell me more. From there, we started our work together, developing the stories that we think in the book, and I know the book's not available yet in the UK, stories that would help anyone understand a couple of core principles about collaboration. I'm going to let Bill speak with you about that in a moment. But the result is, I think, a book that provides, as Danny suggested, a playbook, and it's a playbook for a networked world, a world that is distinguished by boundaries of all sorts, political, physical, cultural, that are falling fast, and yet they're resilient as heck. I mean, we have legacy computer systems that can't speak with each other across boundaries. We have mindsets that can't give up ideas of holding on to power when power instead needs to be shared. We have organizations that are not comfortable in a network world where information moves quickly and we have no idea sometimes where or when we'll need it most. The book then becomes a way for people through 8 steps that Bill and I have discovered. The reflection, I think, really of common sense that he and I have both discovered in the course of our work together, both in practice and in research, that anyone can do. So it's we're pleased to be able to share it here today. It's a privilege to be here. I understand this is a quite influential organization, and I'm deeply appreciative of the honor to be part of your lunch today. Thank you again, Danny, and I'll turn it over to Bill.
Andy, once again, thank you to you and certainly the Policy Exchange. This is, I think, the 4th or 5th opportunity I've had over the years to speak to a group such as this on a variety of issues, usually around the issue of policing, law enforcement, criminal justice. Speaking to you today on a much broader context, and that context is the idea of collaboration and the essentiality of collaboration in the incredibly changing world that we now live in, the network world. And the idea that if you don't collaborate, if you don't find ways to collaborate, that you may perish or you may fail. And the book, its essence, 8 steps that we have identified, both from personal experience, my time certainly in policing, Zach, who writes many case studies for the Kennedy School at Harvard, that as we looked at successes and failures, successes I've had in policing, failures I've had successes and failures. It's actually studied in a wide variety of private sector and public sector initiatives. Why did they work? What did they have in common? What was the progression of the elements? And why did they fail in those cases which did fail? The book is a difficult book to classify. In the United States, I've gone into different Barnes & Noble and at the airports, and I have yet to find it in the same place in any of those stores, because it's a leadership book, it's a management book, it's a book of stories, and but most of all, it's an informative book around the subject of collaboration. And collaboration is an essential component of everything we do in life today, and increasingly so as the world gets smaller because of the networks that we are all subscribing to and becoming part of. Facebook this year will potentially surpass 1 billion subscribers. So the idea that through that one particular piece of technology, you might have the potential to reach 1 billion people. How long would that take you into the old mediums that we used? So the book, I think it's the right time for the issue that we speak about. And the stories, if you don't like one, we'll go on to the next one. There's about 24 of them. And if you're one of these people that wants to get to the heart of the book right off the bat, we'll have page 3 or 4 of the introduction. There's the 8 essential elements. So it's a book for everybody. If you're a speed reader, if you're somebody who wants to dwell on it, if somebody who wants to fall asleep at night reading, that if you want stimulation, it is all of those things. What I'd like to speak to just quickly is one of the stories in the book that will give you a bit of a flavor of the wide variety of things we cover. We start with one story about red balloons, and we end with the Arab Spring and what went on in Egypt. The idea that without the ability to collaborate across Twitter, blogs, and websites, that revolution would never have succeeded. The governments, as they have since time immemorial, would have been able to shut down communication, shut down the ability for the opposing forces to collaborate with each other and to keep the momentum of that revolution going. Well, after 9/11, and certainly your country as well as mine shares a ongoing and very significant concern about the issues of terrorism. You certainly, with the upcoming celebration of the Olympics, have that as a piece of your concern, if you will. And the collaboration is going to be so essential to ensuring that that event goes out safely, on time, and in the way it's supposed to. That shortly after 9/11 in the United States, and we talk about this story in the book, we were on highest alert we've ever been on, particularly for external terrorism dangers. And about 3 o'clock in the morning, a Cuban gunboat, in Cuba we've been on high alert for over 50 years watching what was on down there. Well, 3 o'clock in the morning, 4 military defectors from Cuba, all dressed up like Fidel Castro with the green fatigues and armed, in an armed Cuban gunboat, take sail across from Cuba. They're defecting. They want to defect. And the closest point in the United States is 90 miles away, Key West, at the lower end of the end of Florida, the island chain. 3 o'clock in the morning, they chug into the harbor. They moor at the marina next to the Coast Guard marina, which is charged with the Coast Guard defense in the United States, and can't find anybody, and begin roaming the streets of Key West, trying to find somebody to defect to effectively surrender to. So here you have these 4 armed Cubanos walking around, don't count any police, didn't count any Coast Guardsmen, and they finally found the Hyatt Regency, where they walk in and they have to wake up the desk clerk, and he doesn't understand what the hell they're talking about, throws them out. And the next several hours they roam the streets and finally find a policeman who they are able to convince who they are and what they want to do. Now this is at the height of the security concern in the United States. Didn't get much publicity, understandably, governments are about to advertise it. But the rest of the story is we go on to tell about the collaboration that was formed to deal with what this incident identified, which was the idea that if we were going to try to keep our shores safe from incursions, either by planes, certainly, to get most of the attention, but by boats, what was going to happen? And we have in our country, the U.S. Navy, Coast Guard, and then other maritime officials ranging down to harbor patrol or local police. Navy classifies ships as ships. Coast Guard talks about them as vessels, I think, and the maritime services refer to them as boats. So we didn't even have generic classification of what we were talking about. And the idea was to try and identify where are all of these things, boats, vessels, ships, at any given time. Where are they going? Much the same as we track planes in the sky. How do we track on our oceans and on our seas where these boats are, and do they pose a potential threat to the United States? And it's a story about how that collaboration occurred very quickly in response to that crisis and concern. It's just a flavor of a story, a military story, a government story. We have stories about the private sector, Alcoa Aluminum, where they collaborated around the idea of safety, to take a very hostile work union, to work with a company that was having a hard time convincing their workers that they were concerned with safety over profit, and how the gentleman, the leader, who had the vision for this, how he moved Alcoa in the late 80s and 90s into one of the most profitable companies of that time and era around the issue of safety. There's story after story along that line. And certainly in your country at this time, there was no shortage of issues that you might argue would benefit from a more successful collaboration. The 8 elements in the book basically start and end with leadership. Leadership, whether it's a Steve Jobs, one individual has an idea, we now have Apple, or 3 or 4 young kids in the garage that basically come up with the idea of, Google, that it can be an individual, it can be a group of people, but they have to have leadership around a vision. The idea that this is something that we want to do, something we think we can do. And then the idea is to get other people to collaborate, to come on a platform, common ground with them, where this idea can be shared. And in this network world today, how easy it is to get the idea out of the basement, out of the garage, out of the executive office, through the Googles, through the blogs, through the Twitters, through traditional media, if you will. And the idea is to right-size the problem, don't bite off more than you can chew or accomplish. Make sure there's something in it for everybody. Stay in the political headlights. That's what I feel in New York City with Mayor Giuliani. We had a shared vision that we could do something about crime. We had a platform where we could get cops on, community groups on, business leaders on. Everybody wanted to make New York a safer place. There was something in it for everybody. Cops wanted to be cops, and wanted to be cops. The public wanted safety. Business wanted a reputation for a safer city, so they could build more hotels, hire more workers. Government wanted more workers, paying more taxes. There was something in it for everybody. It was right-sized. In my case, however, Giuliani and I did not stay in his political headlights. I went outside of his vision. And when that happens in the United States, police chiefs and mayors, police chiefs go and mayors stay. And I made sure when I was in Los Angeles, a number of years later, I married my 2 mayors, my successor mayors, and stayed very much in their political headlights, and had a success that, in my perspective, was much more significant than the success that I'm more well-known for in your country and around the world. Most people, when they think of Bill Bratton, try and think of New York. The New York experience paled in comparison to the successes of the collaboration in Los Angeles a number of years later. And it all comes back to the idea of vision, leadership, and passion about that vision. And with that, Danny, if I could turn it back to you to lead us on our merry way for the rest of this session.
Good, please. We're going to have 2 opportunities that are now coming. At the end, you're going to have an opportunity to buy this book, which is on sale actually very cheaply today, so it's £15. And I'm sure that Bill is actually happy to sign it for you. And I've had a chance because I have one early, so I can tell you that it's worth it. And the second thing we're going to do is to have a question and answer session, which will start now. And anybody who wants to ask either of our 2 speakers or both anything should indicate.
Could you tell us about the Los Angeles experience?
Los Angeles experience. Los Angeles experience as it relates to this book, and some of the idea for the book, Zach's idea to create the book, was he was aware of the Los Angeles experience. He was certainly aware of the New York experience. That when I was hired as chief of police, there was a mayor, Jim Hahn, who had a vision that his city could in fact be made much safer against gang violence in particular, a particular problem, the emerging concern about terrorism, which took us shortly after 9/11, and that to make it happen, he was going to have to attract to his platform this idea that this initiative was going to require a lot of people from a lot of different areas, African Americans, Latinos, business, police, and the police were the weakest link in this process because the police in Los Angeles for almost 50 years had operated independent of government in many respects. The chief of police was appointed for a lifetime appointment, and as widely reported in the run-up to the Los Angeles riots in the 1990s, the chief of police and the mayor had not spoken for several years. So there was a fair collaboration of enormous magnitude. So Mayor James Hahn basically puts out for new chiefs of police. I applied based on my track record in New York. He hired me. You now had leadership that had a shared vision, the ability to bring onto the platform cops who were very dispirited, an African American community that felt that had been walked with the police department for many, many years, a growing Latino population spurred by immigration, a lot of it illegal, and a business community that was very, very concerned about the city, its foundations, race relations, and any of the other issues that were happening to the economy. And the idea of the LA experience was how to get police and community, particularly the African American community, together, where they had been literally at war with each other. And the collaborations that were necessary to make that happen, a lot of passion, my ability to convey passion about concern for the African American community, passion for my cops about their concerns about their public safety, because there were so few of them. 9,000 police for a 4 million population. I had 38,000 police in New York for 8 million. Would have needed 18,000. But so safety was a concern. There was a shared concern of safety. African Americans concerned about their safety, not only from gangs, but safety from the police. The police community was concerned about violence from the gangs, but also concerned that very often when they make an arrest, the community would basically not be supportive of it. So there's the ability to, where they were coming at the issue from different perspectives, they were on common ground, that they wanted the same thing. And the idea was to be able to find a way that you can, in some respects, serve as a translator. And then the issue was, what's in it for me? For the cops to become more responsive to the community, for the community to start giving a little more support and trust to the cops, trial and error, a lot of mistakes along the way. But we talk about it a lot in the book, about how it happened, the Los Angeles story. My voice in the book, that Zach has done a wonderful job capturing, is the New York experience and the incompleteness of that experience, and that we did not end up successfully dealing with the racial issues in New York. They were probably worse in the late 90s than they were in the early 90s, but then in Los Angeles, which had an even more significant race problem than New York, that we were able to, as the LA Times quoted, turn the corner on race relations, and the police were leading the event, not trailing behind it.
Hi, I have a question for either Zach or Bill. Collaboration, a lot of the collaboration you were describing sounded like it was based on a few heroic individuals who had the same vision. I wonder if you could comment a bit on the difference between heroic collaboration and maybe something more systemic, because we have lots of reasons to collaborate in public service in the UK, and it's incredibly hard to do even when you have really well-motivated people. So are there lessons from the book which go beyond just sort of a few, let's say, heroes who make it happen?
It's a great question. It's great because the book actually has an endless succession of heroes, but each one of them would say, don't write about me, write about all the people around me. And it's true. Now, for the purposes of a book, we're going to raise up individuals, and heroism doesn't scale. It takes heroes sometimes to step forward and say, let's do it. Let's start the plan forward. Here's a vision. I have the stature, I can take the risk, come with me, here's how we can do it. It must work for, and it must pay, and I think this is one of Bill's great insights, it must pay in whatever currency those with whom you wish to collaborate will resonate. And it's a different currency for different people. It could be power, it could be prestige, it could be money, it could be all the things that you wanted to achieve as a cop or as a social worker, as a teacher, that now you have the opportunity to, because there's a collaboration that unleashes that potential. In order to succeed with a collaboration, it must be something that I think not only ordinary folks in ordinary times can do ordinarily well, right? So that it can, but it also has to pay. And it's that combination and that balancing that I think mark all successful collaborations, especially those that sustain. And it's because you can't expect people to be heroes every day. People don't show up for work to be heroes. People show up for work to get a job done that they, on a good day, believe in and would like to do really well. And if you can tap that and activate that, and great leaders like Bill Bratton and many others around the world make that happen, then you can have success in collaboration.
Well, the stories in the book, there are, I'm trying to think if there are any examples of, when I think of heroism, I tend to think of it in terms of physical bravery. And I think the word is used too loosely, too many categories. What we effectively have here are people who take great risks, oftentimes professional risk, or risks that may in fact impact on their personal lives in a significant way. And the majority of the stories we tell are of success from a variety of perspectives. So the 8 themes we talk about, you can match them up against whether it's the head of the school system in Rio de Janeiro, one of the poorest in the world, where she has, through the use of Twitter, been able to basically totally change the school environment for 1 million kids in that impoverished city. And that, or stories of the gentleman I talked about from Alcoa, that are they heroes? No, but they're risk takers, or that they're people that are so fervent, and this is where the passion comes in, about what they are doing, whether it's heading up a school system, heading up a business to make profit for your investors, but also to be concerned with the safety of your workers at the same time. Or in my case, as the chief of police, that I'm very passionate about the importance of police, and particularly in issues involving in my country, and certainly I think continuing issues in your country around issues of race, ethnic identification, that police are going to have to be the central point, along with government, a shared vision, a shared passion, that you can do something positively about that issue, so that we're not seen as the instigators, but we're seen as effectively the collaborators of success.
If I may just follow up quickly with this small story as well. You know, today we see not just collaboration by design, but collaboration that is emergent, right? It's the virtue of the network world that we can stand up collaborations around the world very, very quickly on Twitter and Facebook. In the story, in the book, we tell the story of, as Bill mentioned, of a young man about 10 red balloons. This is a story of a fellow who entered a contest that was run in December of 2010. A young man named George Hotz was famous around the world as an iPhone hacker and the Sony PlayStation hacker, and had many, many followers. And he woke up one day to discover that DARPA, our Advanced Research Project Agency, was sponsoring a contest that were going to float 10 red weather balloons somewhere in the United States, and the first team that could spot all 10 without knowing the locations in advance would win a prize to celebrate the 40th anniversary of the internet, which DARPA wanted to celebrate as somehow having great potential. A number of teams formed up. MIT, very powerful; Georgia Tech, very powerful; great computers, great professors, great staff, great faculty. Developed for 2 months before the contest, December 2010. The day before the contest launched, George Hotz, who's now 17 or 18, rolls out of bed, tweets his 50,000 followers, stand by for an announcement tomorrow, go to my website, and I'm going to have a message for you. The day comes, and he says, On his website, he has a picture of a big red balloon. He says we're going to be running the United States government is running a scavenger hunt, a treasure hunt. The first one who can find all 10 balloons wins 40 grand. But more than that, here's what I'm going to do for you. I'm going to give you a new hack of the new iPhone and make it even more powerful than ever before. Well, word spread around the world on the hacker bulletin boards and among his 50,000 Twitter followers that we have to do this for ourselves. We have to do this for @GeoHot. And the message was from George Hotz: if you're driving down a road and you happen to see one of these big red balloons, turn to your driving mate and say, "Dude, it's a balloon," and go to that website. And there's a website called dudeitsaballoon.com. That's where you could register. Guess what? George Hotz and his band of millions or thousands led for the first 8 hours of the contest. By the 9th hour, MIT had prevailed, had found all 10 balloons. There's also been all sorts of trading and horse trading and diversions and false sightings and disinformation and all that stuff. For the first 8 hours, none of the professionalism of the other teams mattered. It was the network world that was dominating. MIT, Georgia Tech, eventually 1 and 2, George Hotz, number 3. It was a powerful testimonial to emerging collaboration. No heroes, but slacker dudes who said, "Dude, it's a balloon.com."
And also the points in the book about the power of the network world, where this kid sitting in his basement was able to connect instantly with 50,000, and then connected with many other thousands to identify across the scope of the United States these 10 balloons floating up in the air. But also the idea when we talk about the common platform that they all came to, but the idea of what's in it for me. Well, if you're one of these 50,000 followers of this hacker, that what's in it for you is something probably most of us at our age don't know what the hell is in it for them, but basically they get access to the iPhone that you couldn't get legally, if you will, but he's hacking into their system. So there was something in it for each one of his followers, and they were able to really almost pull off. So it's just an example of the network world.
So when you spoke about the LA example, you talked about building trust slowly. I wonder whether you could say a bit more about how you go about building trust. And I think it's something that probably came through as well in the example Zach just used. There has to be trust somewhere. How does that work?
The issue of leadership, the vision, the passion, the platform. The platform can be, in Los Angeles, it was many things. It was a website that we spent quite a bit of money, private money, that was donated to the department. So we probably have one of the best police websites in the world that was going to take a very closed, secretive police organization and make it a transparent one. So the same information that my police commanders were sharing at their crime meetings each morning was being shared with the public and the LA Times, which worked with us in the development of the website, on here's the crime that's occurring, here's the people we're looking for, here's the helplines that you, the community, can work with us in collaboration on. It was also the idea of intimate collaboration at the community level with myself as chief of police, Ricky and I. We talked about that probably wasn't a church basement in the 7 years we were in LA that we didn't at one time or another go into to meet with community groups. As chief of police, I was out there meeting Latino community, African American community, Armenian community, Korean community, that the face of the LA police department was certainly me in the newscast, but I was also the face of the department in the neighborhoods. But what I was doing was introducing the other faces of the LAPD, the faces that were going to be there when I left the meeting, the captain, the senior lead officers, the police officers. This is your police department. In introducing, in some instances for the first time, those officers to the legitimate community, if you will, because they spend most of the time, the cops, dealing with the illegitimate or the illegal community, the gangbangers, etc. And the paranoia, the fear, the mistrust that the police were feeling of the community was because they were spending most of their time interacting with that portion of the community that would breed that. So it was the idea of transparency, inclusion. We want to work with you inside the tent rather than keeping you outside the tent. And even within the organization, the LAPD was a very dysfunctional organization in that it had all of its separate silos, detectives, uniform, intelligence, and they just weren't collaborating well together. That's where the CompStat system that many of you are aware of, the New York success story, was so essential for the sharing of initially crime information. But that crime information then we began to share with the community, with the media, so that the idea was that we were building up a degree of trust that we didn't have things to hide. And when we had a crisis, and there were crises all the time, that we were not then going to the community to try to explain ourselves for the first time, because we'd been there in between the crises, so that the constancy of us being there over time diminished the crises, because effectively it was being treated in between illnesses or crises. So when it did occur, it tended to have less resonation. And the collaboration elements, and again, we talk about, as it relates to my personal experiences in the book about some of those issues.
I would just reflect for a moment on LA as well. Bill didn't take on all battles at once, and he didn't take on battles that were unwinnable. It doesn't do anyone any good to die your first time out. You have to win and bring people along and show them that if they throw their lots in with you, that you can assure something back to them in return. You can assure more safety. You can assure something that matters to them. Bill, I think, this is the story of LA, is being able to bring not just his political leadership at the mayor's office, but bring the LAPD with him in a way that, that assured that they would be there when he needed them to be there, doing what they all agreed was important to do, which is to broaden their collaboration with communities. When crisis did hit, and there are 5 accounts in the book of such moments, in MacArthur Park at the end, this is the greatest crisis of 7 years of Bill's tenure in Los Angeles. The trust had been built. He had delivered, and the consequence was a city that was resilient and a police department that could take the blow and come back out. So that a week after MacArthur Park, a devastating riot, essentially, it's fair to say it was I'm not sure these
police riot.
A police riot. That a week after what would otherwise have been 10 years earlier, a conflagration in Los Angeles, a spark that would have set the city ablaze. A week later, the mayor, Bill, the city councilors were strolling in that park, greeting Latino mothers and daughters and sons and fathers, and they said, yeah, it happened, but it's a nice day. Thank you very much. It took terrific management of a crisis. It took a knowledge of a trust building of 7 years, but the payoff was in that moment when still these vestiges of an old culture surfaced once again. Bill had the trust capital he needed to move decisively in a way that said, and I will be here for you again now here today.
Bill and Zach, thank you very much for what you've said so far. I'm very interested in your comments where I asked my question on the issue of compassion. As someone who was actually not only a professional infantry officer but taught at our Military Academy Centres, York and West Point, and there is no great leader who lacks passion. The two go hand in hand. And obviously the ability to empower a team so that the idea that is followed becomes theirs, not the leaders. My wife and I were recently in Doha, in the Middle East, and this is the question has to do with getting your message about collaboration across borders. And we were attending the International Sports Security Conference, a gathering of people running major sporting events from all over the world. There were even people there from Rio, concerned about their games. And it was all to do with trying to share ideas. And there was one particularly poignant moment when the guy responsible for the Egyptian Football Association, which recently had experienced this appalling scene in their stadium there, genuinely not knowing what to do, reached out to the other people there, which included Lord Stevens and others, united and said, I don't know what to do, who can help me? Look at what went wrong, and who can help me learn from the mistakes that were made? Could you tell us what your plans are to get this extraordinarily important message out rapidly around the world, places where there are many people wanting to know how to adopt the lessons that you're talking about? Thanks.
Conference you reference, my wife and I attended it last year, the first time it was held, and as you know, Qatar is attempting to become one of the sports capitals of the world, and it's absolutely essential to them to understand sports security in that part of the world, that very troubled part of the world, as we're seeing in Bahrain at the moment. The collaboration that you witnessed is the beginning of that. It's like the first time I went into a church basement in Los Angeles that they were pretty hostile to me as a white who had succeeded 2 black chiefs of police going into that community because they just felt the odds were stacked against them. Similarly, in the sports world, that with all the myriad issues they're facing, it is going to take leadership that is willing to not accept it has all the answers, that others may have them. And so, for example, that the Rio de Janeiro, with this upcoming World Cup and Olympics, both coming shortly behind each other, they are benefiting at this time because they've got a very effective governor, and he has something very unusual in Latin America, a very effective police chief who also happens to be honest. And many of the issues in that country have to do with corruption and pervasive corruption and inefficiencies. And they are making phenomenal changes. So even what's going on in Rio, the fact that a representative from Rio was there, that Egyptian needs to be talking with the guy from Rio, and they need to be talking with Sir John, who basically the company that he works with, Monitor Quest. One of their areas of security specialty is the issue of sports security. So it's the platform. Last week you were at a platform. You were in a country that has a vision about what to do about sports and sports security. And the idea was it was bringing a lot of people together so that what's in it for me is maybe a better idea that, about how to deal with my problem. And what's also involved is guaranteed, much the same as I left there with a wallet full of, then soon a BlackBerry full of email addresses. A number of people from that conference I'm in contact with all the time. Similarly, in the network world, you have the ability to instantly hook up, and I'm having this issue. What do you think I should do? So the point of the subtitle of the book, The Network World, is really going to facilitate addressing a problem, much the same as it can facilitate causing a problem. The balance is to dealing with crises. How do you deal with somebody who's stirring up a problem with misinformation? And basically the fact you're having a platform that you've got trust in your own connectivity.
Bill, this is for you. First of all, I'd just like to thank you, because when I read your article in the Telegraph early last year, that I started a company called FaceWatch, and that absolutely inspired me to carry on, because I think the way you explain broken windows theory and the whole thing about reducing low-level crime, which for me has been a real problem in our wine bar, for example, and it's why I started FaceWatch. It really helped me to get on top of the problem and to understand what we're trying to do. And my aim through FaceWatch is to try and create one database and one way of sharing information between everybody. Because my view is that we're like a big gang that's being bullied by a very, very small gang, because we're only sharing information. We've got 43 police forces in the UK. You can commit a crime in Victoria Station, you can walk out, it's like being in another country because there's no information sharing. It is the major problem. And when I've been talking to some people in the States, I started to find out the issues over there. There are 19,000 police forces. How do you think you're ever going to connect all of them up so that actually you start to work as one rather than lots of individual little silos, which to me is why these guys can get away with it?
The issue of the 19,000 versus your 43, Scotland's current 8, which may soon be 1, is to effectively develop the platform. The idea in the States, we all have the vision of and leadership around the vision that police count, cops count, that we have an essential role in the prevention of crime and not just a role in responding to it. And the events of 9/11 have highlighted even more so the importance of the prevention focus rather than the almost singular focus on response, which has been the case for 30 or 40 years in our country and similarly in your own. And the idea was, with this platform, what is the platform? It is now enhanced significantly because of the internet, if you will. We now have in the United States 72 fusion centers, which are the ultimate collaboration, jointly funded, federal government, state government, local government, jointly staffed, federal, state, local, and enabled, empowered to share, for terrorism purposes, high-level security information from which we can make intelligence, make actionable intelligence, something that was not in place anywhere prior to 9/11. But we also, to expand on the connectivity and the collaboration, insisting that they be increasingly all crime fusion centers. So they don't only deal with just terrorism. There's an understanding that so much, and you certainly in the British Isles have had much more experience with, by paying attention to the little things, the broken windows that seemingly don't have any bearing on terrorism, that many of your plots are detected in the early stage because somebody's reporting a disturbance or a crime. And so if we kept crime reporting and analysis in one silo and terrorism reporting and analysis another silo, we'd be missing the connectivity. And so these fusion centers are ultimate collaboration where there's a common platform, there's leadership vision, there's something in it for everybody. Local police get a lot of intelligence they didn't used to get, national forces get intelligence they didn't used to get. And it has made our country increasingly safe in terms of overall crime going down, even in the midst of the worst recession since the Great Depression. But in terms of terrorism, the 100-some-odd acts of terrorism that we're aware of that were detected in the United States since 9/11, 75% of those were detected at the local level. A citizen, a police officer, who had an ability to report a piece of information, and the information, which in the old days might have just been sloughed off, that there's a connectivity with a trained police officer being able to take that piece of information, connect it to a terrorist analyst who was able to take a look at a much larger perspective, and they make actionable intelligence out of it. Think of that, in my country, 75% of the detected terrorist acts, homegrown terrorist acts since 9/11, have been detected at the local level. And there's the ultimate collaboration. Citizen, the local police, the national government to action, to prevent rather than respond after the fact.
If I may just add to that, it's wonderful and important and critical for those departments to act as one when it comes to sharing information and moving data like that. It's also a tradition in the United States that there are 50 states and there are 19,000 police departments for a reason. Everyone likes to do it a little different. And that always needs to be respected. The last mile, how we will handle privacy, how we will handle security of information is something that's typically left to the states. But most importantly, and that's essential for political support, when these large platforms come together, that may impinge on states' latitude or on the latitude of jurisdictions that like to treat matters in their own peculiar, sometimes, way. But the fact is also that by having 19,000 police departments, there's a virtue for innovation. The platform not only needs to assure that we treat like matters alike and we are able to share data, but that we're able to exchange best practice and let those best practices flourish and develop, so that when the BlackBerry gets loaded with email addresses from conferences, the platform can then take advantage of that as discoveries are made in the most surprising places. And they will be made in the most surprising places. The worst thing that can happen is when, on a need-to-know basis, someone grabs all the data, and it's what Paul O'Neill in the Alcoa story refers to as information creep. He says, I don't want information to creep and create power in an organization. I want it out there. The worst thing that can happen is for someone to say, that information is on a need-to-know basis, I'll tell you what you need to know. That's too often what happens. Platforms work when they make that data available so that it can be discovered, it can move back and forth. It takes a strong platform, strong leadership, good technology, and good politics to be successful. But when it does, both innovation and effectiveness will flourish.
Let me give you a real-world example of perishing, a platform that collapsed. In our country, there are two major book companies, Borders, and Barnes & Noble. Strong competitors with each other, had very similar models, huge bookstores that attracted people. They were the platform. People could come there for all types of books and other items. And Barnes & Noble, though, a few years ago began to recognize with this changing world that to stay competitive, they felt they were going to have to not rely on the Kindles and the Amazon.coms of the world. They were going to have to create their own availability of books through an electronic platform. So they developed what they call the Nook, and it's advertised heavily. Every one of their stores is now marketed, so as soon as you walk in, you see the Nook. And they anticipated correctly that the reading habits of their platform audience was changing. And if they wanted to appeal to the next generation of audience, that was a generation that wanted to get their reading material online. They didn't want to necessarily go to a bookstore platform. They wanted to basically go electronically to the platform. Borders took no such initiative, misread its clientele. It's now out of business. It collapsed. The platform collapsed because theirs was no longer viable in a changing network world. Another quick example of a successful platform is Hsmi, the high-end fashion house. They recognized that their market, the 1% versus 99%, that there was only so many high-end dresses they could sell. Their profitability was being capped. They ended up in a marketing deal with Target in the United States, a middle-class, working-class focus, to provide a Hsmi line, Hsmi label into that environment, both through the web as well as on the platform going to the store. On the first day of making that available, the store models were all gone, sold out completely, and there was so much traffic on the web that they almost collapsed the web. A successful collaboration between this high-end fashion house and this middle-of-the-road department store, that they found a platform where they could basically share customers and share success.
We're going to have to squeeze the questions in, so.
I'll keep it quick, as short as possible. From the Chartered Management Institution, really welcome the focus on leadership as both the first and your 8th element and your 8 plans. But really, how to make it more systemic in terms of collaborative skills, how do we build this into leadership education? Obviously, you've got the Kennedy School of Government where you met and started this collaboration. In the UK, we've just closed our National School of Government, which is about bringing public sector leaders from across different disciplines. So what lessons are there really for the UK, do you think, in terms of how we build collaborative skills into our leadership and management education?
I wasn't able to hear the entire question. Could you just recap it?
Well, it's the same to me. It was my hard of hearing it.
Okay, I hope I haven't done harm to your question, but the question is how you best achieve this collaboration in the light of what we've done in Britain is to close our School of Government. In America, you've got schools that teach this kind of leadership, and our question was saying that focus on training people to have the leadership was very worthwhile. Was there something more precise that I've missed?
No, it is along those lines. We have separate police training colleges.
I'm sorry, you're going to have to speak up if you...
Sorry, it's very much about how do we build into management education collaborative ways of working. In the UK, we've closed School of Government, which brings together leaders from different disciplines. So we have separate academies for MOD, for police. That just encourages more silent working potentially.
Okay, I think I can speak to this. The difference between the American police, which is, I'll speak to that, those silos, American police experience and British police experience is that you really have a structured system of education and training for your leaders. That something that is not in place in the United States. Is you have what is the command college? That that you don't get to be a chief constable without going through a series of educational exposure and training academies. In the United States, there is no such regimented process. And quite frankly, I've been an admirer of the British system because of its consistency of educational and exposure that is unheard of in the United States, where progress to the top is a much more of a hodgepodge than the structured environment. The issue that you relate to is that it doesn't necessarily lead to a high degree of creativity and individualism, because they've all come up in a more rigid form, versus in the United States, you have 19,000 people who are roaming all over the pasture, if you will. So there's pluses and minuses to both systems. I think the ideal world would be to try to find a platform, continue emphasizing that term, where you would get the benefits of both. The idea of the much more structured exposure, that's the same as a military Sanford he talked about, West Point. In the United States, we have, on a volunteer basis, you can go to some of those higher education opportunities, versus in your structure, it's almost mandatory that you have to go up through those to get to a chief constable position. So no system, I would suggest, is the ideal system, and maybe it's really up to each country, if you will, to make that decision as to you want to continue what you're doing. In the United States, the effort has been made to try and provide more schooling for managers and leaders than has been in existence. But that's usually offered at a private university level rather than government level.
I've actually run out of time, but I'm going to take 2 more questions. I'm going to take one there and one there, just because I promised, and then we're going to take an answer.
Hello, Rory Gagan from Policy Exchange and the Crime and Justice team. I think there's huge potential in the UK, England and Wales especially, to fight crime, prevent crime, detect crime through improved collaboration. So I sort of applaud kind of the book and kind of where it's going. One of the things I'm also keen to sort of get your views on right now is kind of the extent to which you might agree with me that police and crime commissioners potentially provide a new mechanism to inject some accountability first into the system, so that there is someone who may well perish rather than kind of just soldiering on. And also just building on that, I suppose, kind of actually someone who can build a platform, a shared platform across all those elements of law enforcement and criminal justice to get to where we need to be.
Can we take the other question first and then?
Thanks. Nico McDonald. My question is about the need for a goal and a kind of vision, if you like, to align people to create a platform for collaboration. If you take not a great example because it's such a big example, but post-war Britain, in the light of the Beveridge Report and recognition of poverty and all the other injustices that existed, and the heroism of the Second World War, and government leadership, Britain was able to create a welfare state, national health service, and so on. And to an extent, people were aligned around that vision and the leadership provided by politicians and so on. Perhaps the doctors needed a bit more persuading than others in that situation. Today, it seems that politicians are quite managerial in the way in which they address things and are quite light on vision and leadership. If that's the way that you perceive things, what are the limits of your model of collaboration in that context? Does that limit collaboration extensively, or is it only a minor impediment?
If I could answer the first question, I think I'm probably more versed on the police commission issue.
Of course.
And then if you give you a chance, then maybe Joe both of us can respond to the second. On the issue of your police commission initiative, which is moving forward, elections happening at some point in the near future, that is, I would think, a tremendous expansion of collaborative opportunity. Because the commissioner's role is not necessarily the crime-fighting aspect of it, but what, if I understand from my 20-year exposure now to your country and your government, is the continuing sense that police are still not sensitive enough to local issues, that there is still a tendency, a preponderance of focus on the national government, and that the juxtaposition between serious crime and quality of life crime, broken windows, that the belief that there's still too much focus on the serious crime and not enough on the local crime that's creating fear, disorder, and that people see every day, and that in many respects is potentially destroying communities. So the commissioner model, while it's argued that it's based on the American model is such a hodgepodge, there's 19,000 different models over there. Here, effectively, you're going to end up with 43. You get 43 experiments going at the same time. That is they're going to be reflective of the leadership and vision of the commissioner, the cooperation and supportive vision by the chief constable, and then what the expectation of the community itself is. Are those expectations being met with the new form of criminal justice and police structure? So, a very interesting time you're going toward. The American model is, again, with 19,000 departments that no two of them are exactly alike. Well, my 6 chief of police experiences were all in very different organizational structures. But ultimately, what I tried to accomplish in my policing career through community policing was collaboration. There's the 3 elements of community policing: a partnership, problem-solving, focus. Partnership, now having written the book, I'll change that to collaboration. It throws my 3 Ps off that I talk about. Collaboration is the idea to provide opportunity to identify the problems that are creating crime, fear, and disorder. And much the same as those terrorism acts I referenced earlier were detected at a very early growth stage, like a skin cancer, that similarly, what collaboration promises is that problems that the police would have with a national focus not have readily focused attention on because of now the local focus that's required by a police commissioner elected locally may in fact focus attention onto that area. And if successful, will catch a lot of problems while they're still broken windows before they become destroyed buildings. See how Zach and I are collaborating on these questions also?
I'll take the one about
We're on the same platform.
Envision. So the question is, today, if before we needed goals and visions, don't we need them even more today?
And yet, leaders who can espouse them rather than being managerial.
Yeah, isn't it somehow more difficult, or what has happened? I think the answer is, it goes back to something Bill said first, which is that you must have a passion about what you talk about and how you speak of it. But the fact is that a goal is essential. It has to be doable, and it has to resonate, it has to excite, it has to energize. There are plenty of crises around of all sorts. Crises are important to recognize and to call attention to as a way to mobilize and to raise passions around. It could be a crisis of war, as in World War II. It could be a crisis of identity. It could be a crisis of money. It could be something that around which people can come together and say, this matters to me. And then a vision that says, here's how we can do better together than we can alone. That's still possible. And whether it's the crisis today in Syria and how to handle the travesty and tragedy of events there. Today, President Obama has announced a new set of sanctions for those who provide technology to Syria to use social media for oppressive means and cell phones for oppressive measures. That's an interesting and important development. It creates a new way for people to say, this is what we stand for, this is important, we have an opportunity to do something that changes the world for good and to come together to do it. I think essentially for this is the idea of, and this goes to the sports event example as well, is that leaders today need a humility. In a network world, no one can go it alone. To be both humble, that they need partners and willing, but they also need a sense that tomorrow can always be better. They need to have some optimism that together we can do better than we are today. If you sit back and instead you're pessimistic, it doesn't get any better than this, and you're arrogant, and no one can do it better than we do. So that's a killer. Humble yet optimistic, I think, is a mantra that leaders with goals and vision need to have to be successful in the network world, and we do see it from time to time. So.
Okay, thank you all very much for your questions, and of course to our speakers for their answers. I did say that there was the opportunity to buy the book. It's at the back there if you would like to do it, which I very strongly recommend myself. And I thank you very much indeed for coming to another Policy Exchange event. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have.
Danny, thank you once again. Appreciate it.
very interesting when you look at the playbook that this book establishes, how important a sense of common mission is, and that's something that Policy Exchange has been interested in trying to establish and interested in trying to work out what that means. So on a personal level, because of Bill Bratton's involvement and his collaboration on this book, on a policy level, because we've been interested in the questions that he's been interested in, but also on this very broad intellectual front, how we get collaboration, how we encourage people to collaborate. It couldn't be a better place or a better time to launch Collaborate or Perish. I welcome its authors, Bill Bratton and Sanjay.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Danny, for your kind welcome, and thank you very much for your hospitality. I arrived yesterday here in London. It's a pleasure to be here. I even love the weather. To me, it's a pleasure. Bill and I wrote a book that we feel strongly is critical for today, but it also started 30 years ago. It is a story that began when Bill and I, both young professionals at the start of our careers, Bill a little farther along than I at the time, in the city of Boston. Boston was in crisis. I worked in the mayor's office. Bill was a lieutenant in the Boston Police Department. And we came together through mutual acquaintances, but then later in life and in the UK, stories that would help anyone understand a couple of core principles about collaboration. I'm going to let Bill speak with you about that in a moment. But the result is, I think, a book that provides, as Danny suggested, a playbook, and it's a playbook for a networked world, a world that is distinguished by boundaries of all sorts, political, physical, cultural, that are falling fast, and yet they're resilient as heck. I mean, we have legacy computer systems that can't speak with each other across boundaries. We have mindsets that can't give up ideas of holding on to power when power instead needs to be shared. We have organizations that are not comfortable in a network world where information moves quickly and we have no idea sometimes where or when we'll need it most. The book then becomes a way for people through 8 steps that Bill and I have discovered. It's a reflection, I think, really of common sense that he and I have both discovered in the course of our work together, both in practice and in research, that anyone can do. So it's we're pleased to be able to share it here today. It's a privilege to be here. I understand this is a quite influential organization, and I'm deeply appreciative of the honor to be part of your lunch today. Thank you again, Danny, and I'll turn it over to Bill.
Andy, once again, thank you to you and certainly the Policy Exchange. I think through the discovery of a collaboration at Harvard at the Kennedy School called the Executive Session for Community Policing. And it was there that a model of collaboration between researchers and practitioners was developed in the midst of what was a crisis, I think it was fair to say, in American policing. A crisis that was felt, I think, most acutely by American police executives, as well as some academics, and soon to be felt in the most extraordinary way by the Reagan White House. And it was a time, Harvard had the reputation, at the time I think it's fair to say, of sort of Beijing on the Charles. And the collaboration then between the professors and staff there with American police executives and the leadership of the Republican administration forged a set of a vision and a plan for the change in American policing that the fellow who led that, a wonderful professor named Mark Moore, promised me when he invited me to staff it, would take place within a decade. And as a result of efforts led by Mark and by Bill and others,
That change was well underway within 5 years, not 10. And it showed, I think, me as a young staffer and then as a staff support for that effort, and as I then went into government myself and in research at the Kennedy School. It showed me the power of vision of practitioners marrying the real-world sense of what's possible and what's needed with academics and with political leadership, together making change happen in most extraordinary ways that gave us what we now know as community policing in the United States and around the world. Bill and I came together some years later, again in Cambridge. I was now full-time directing research programs at Harvard, and had invited him to participate in one of the sessions I was running as a senior executive in law enforcement, but around the table were leaders of American intelligence and military establishments and other organizations, all of whom touch the same set of problems of how to bring all their information together to achieve together what none could alone, namely an awareness of the world, an ability to respond, and the opportunity to collaborate to move the world in ways they all needed but couldn't by themselves. It was at a lunch break, as I took a break from moderating that session, and I thought to myself, there's something we can do here. And I went over to Bill and I said, why don't we take some of the lessons that we're learning here, and some of the lessons that Bill, as a senior executive and practitioner of great standing and achievement, had learned in the field, and talk about what we know about collaboration. It's time, it felt to me, and it was something that we knew we could do. And I said, what do you think? And Bill said, it sounds good, tell me more. From there, we started our work together, developing the stories that we think in the book, and I know the book's not available yet.
Well, hello, thank you very much all for coming. My name is Daniel Finkelstein, I'm the chairman of Policy Exchange. I'm delighted to be here at the sort of British launch intellectual party for Collaborator Parish. And I know that most people in British politics would regard that as actually a question, where they're lying over the answer, deciding whether they want to collaborate or parish. But I don't think that was the author's intention. The Policy Exchange has been very fortunate to have a long and successful collaboration with Bill Bratton, who, as though many people already know, is a policing hero of both the actual physical sense and also intellectually and in terms of public administration. And for him to get together with his friend and colleague Zach Toon, a distinguished academic at Harvard with a lot of experience and interest in precisely the issue of how you collaborate, would always be of interest to Policy Exchange. But it's of great interest to us, particularly at the moment, not just at the obvious level, which is, Britain now has for the first time in peacetime in this last century a collaborative government to two political parties attempting to produce a government coming from very different parts of the political spectrum, but in the broader sense that all governments consist of collaboration, all big efforts in which people are engaged in are collaborative, and Policy Exchange, with its very particular ideas, is interested in how you bring people along with a very, very complicated, big and controversial program of government reform, how you encourage people to feel they're all in it together.